These 6 individuals had everything money could buy. From reckless stunts to ignoring basic safety protocols, these are the stories of millionaires whose final moments proved that fortune can't protect you from your own poor decisions. It was August 12, 2016, in Marin County, California. A clear 78-degree morning set the stage for a fatal attempt to film luxury lifestyle content inside an exclusive hillside community popular with newly wealthy tech entrepreneurs. Brandon Ashworth adjusted his expensive camera equipment while preparing to capture aerial footage of his $16 million cliffside mansion overlooking the Pacific Ocean. At 34, the tech entrepreneur had sold his social media app for $45 million just 18 months earlier, and had become increasingly focused on documenting his luxury lifestyle online. Brandon lived alone in his sprawling 12,000-square-foot estate that featured an infinity pool extending to the cliff's edge, providing dramatic views of the coastline 200 feet below. His social media content focused on luxury experiences and expensive purchases, but he had developed an obsession with creating increasingly dramatic footage to maintain engagement and attract brand sponsorship deals that could supplement his wealth. The drone photography project had been planned for weeks as the centerpiece of his summer content series, featuring his new $15,000 professional-grade drone that he had purchased specifically for aerial cinematography. Brandon had dismissed his personal assistant's suggestion to hire a professional drone operator, insisting that he could master the equipment himself while maintaining creative control over his content and avoiding the expense of professional services. Brandon had spent only 2 hours practicing with the drone in his backyard, focusing more on camera settings than flight safety protocols, and had never bothered to read the comprehensive safety manual that came with the sophisticated equipment. His inexperience with aviation weather patterns meant he didn't understand how coastal cliff faces created unpredictable wind currents that could overwhelm even advanced drone systems. The filming session began with Brandon positioning himself at the edge of his infinity pool while operating the drone from his pool deck, attempting to capture cinematic footage that would showcase both his mansion and the dramatic coastal setting. The morning had started calm, but coastal winds were beginning to strengthen as the day progressed, creating increasingly challenging conditions for drone operation. Brandon became fixated on achieving the perfect shot and ignored multiple wind warnings displayed on his drone controller, dismissing the alerts as overly cautious programming that didn't apply to his expensive professional equipment. He flew the drone closer to the cliff face than recommended, where the complex wind patterns created by the rocky coastline were stronger and more unpredictable than he had anticipated. The drone suddenly lost signal contact as shifting coastal winds and the cliffside terrain disrupted its connection, triggering its automatic return-to-home safety sequence that guided it back toward its launch point. Brandon panicked when he lost control and attempted to manually override the safety system, not understanding that the drone was actually following its programming to return safely to his location. In his desperation to regain control and save his expensive equipment, Brandon leaned further over the infinity pool's edge, while frantically manipulating the controller, trying to re-establish the connection. His feet slipped on the wet pool deck that had been recently cleaned by his maintenance staff, causing him to lose his balance and tumble over the pool's edge. Brandon fell 200 feet down the cliff face, striking the rocky coastline below with devastating force that caused fatal injuries upon impact. His body was discovered 3 hours later by a neighbor who had heard the drone's return-to-home alarm continuing to sound from Brandon's backyard, where the equipment had safely landed exactly as programmed. Emergency responders confirmed that Brandon had died instantly from massive trauma caused by the fall. The drone was found completely intact in his backyard, with flight data confirming signal loss near the cliff face and the successful completion of its programmed return-to-home sequence. Investigators later noted that the drone had functioned exactly as designed, returning safely to its launch point, while Brandon fell from the cliff during the attempt to regain control. It was March 3, 2014, in Midland, Texas. A calm spring afternoon set the stage for a fatal equestrian demonstration at a charity fundraising event within an exclusive ranch community. Victoria Sterling adjusted her custom riding helmet while preparing for what she believed would be an impressive display of horsemanship that would demonstrate her commitment to the local equestrian community. At 28, she had inherited $78 million from her grandfather's oil business 6 months earlier and had immediately purchased a $12 million ranch complete with championship bloodline horses that required expert handling and years of experience to manage safely. Victoria had grown up in urban environments and possessed minimal riding experience beyond occasional trail rides at summer camps, but she had convinced herself that her family's wealth and natural athleticism would translate into equestrian success. Her new ranch featured a collection of high-performance horses that had been selected by the previous owner for their competitive potential rather than their suitability for inexperienced riders. The charity event had been organized to raise funds for local youth programs, with Victoria volunteering to demonstrate advanced riding techniques using her most expensive horse, a $200,000 thoroughbred stallion named Thunderstrike. Professional trainers had repeatedly advised her to spend months developing her skills with calmer horses before attempting to ride the temperamental stallion, but Victoria viewed their caution as an attempt to limit her enjoyment of her expensive purchase. Victoria had been taking riding lessons for only 6 weeks and had never worked with horses of Thunderstrike's caliber, which required subtle communication and confident handling that could only be developed through years of experience. The stallion had been bred for racing and retained the high-strung temperament that made him successful on the track, but dangerous for inexperienced handlers. The demonstration began with Victoria mounting Thunderstrike in front of 50 wealthy donors who had gathered to watch the charity event's entertainment program. The stallion began displaying signs of agitation, including ear-pinning and nervous prancing, behaviors that experienced handlers recognize as warning signs of discomfort with uncertain rider commands. Victoria attempted to project confidence by urging the horse into increasingly advanced maneuvers that she had observed during professional competitions, but had never practiced herself. The stallion became more agitated as Victoria's conflicting signals confused and frustrated him, creating a dangerous situation that experienced riders would have recognized and corrected immediately. Determined to impress her audience with a dramatic finale, Victoria directed Thunderstrike toward a practice jump that had been set up earlier for experienced riders, not understanding that successful jumping required precise timing and communication between horse and rider. The stallion approached the obstacle as Victoria's timing and body position broke down during the maneuver. Thunderstrike refused the jump at the last second, stopping abruptly while Victoria's momentum carried her forward over the horse's head and the jump obstacle. She struck the ground head first with tremendous force, suffering fatal neck injuries that caused immediate paralysis and respiratory failure in full view of the assembled spectators. Emergency responders arrived within 8 minutes and attempted resuscitation procedures, but Victoria was pronounced dead at the scene from severe spinal cord trauma. The medical examiner later ruled her death accidental, caused by injuries sustained during the equestrian accident. Thunderstrike was uninjured and was later retired to a professional breeding facility where he thrived under expert care. It was January 7, 2017, in Beverly Hills, California. A calm winter morning set the stage for a fatal cosmetic surgery session at an exclusive clinic serving wealthy clients seeking aggressive aesthetic procedures. Sophia Chen Williams prepared for surgery, believing the session would correct several features she had fixated on for years. At 31, she had recently inherited $95 million from her family's pharmaceutical business and had already spent more than $500,000 on cosmetic procedures over the previous 2 years. Each intervention brought temporary reassurance, followed by renewed dissatisfaction, leading her to pursue increasingly extensive changes rather than pause or scale back. Sophia had been influenced by social media culture that promoted unrealistic beauty standards and had developed body dysmorphia that drove her to seek increasingly dramatic surgical modifications. Her regular plastic surgeon had refused to perform multiple major procedures simultaneously, citing safety concerns about extended anesthesia exposure and surgical trauma. But Sophia had found a less scrupulous doctor willing to accommodate her demands. The surgical plan combined a facelift, liposuction, breast augmentation, and Brazilian butt lift into a single 8-hour session intended to minimize recovery time. Specialists had warned that stacking major procedures would place dangerous strain on her cardiovascular system. Sophia was also taking prescription stimulants to sustain her demanding schedule, increasing anesthesia risks, factors the surgeon failed to adequately screen for or fully assess before proceeding. The surgery began with the facelift and breast augmentation procedures, which were completed successfully during the first 4 hours, while Sophia remained stable under anesthesia. The surgical team then proceeded with the liposuction, removing significant amounts of fat from multiple body areas before beginning the Brazilian butt lift that would transfer the harvested fat to enhance her buttocks. During the fat transfer portion of the Brazilian butt lift, fat entered Sophia's bloodstream through damaged blood vessels, a known risk when large volumes are injected under pressure. Over the next several minutes, her vital signs began to shift in subtle but concerning ways. Oxygen saturation dropped intermittently, heart rate became irregular, and blood pressure proved increasingly difficult to stabilize despite adjustments to anesthesia and ventilation. The surgical team initially attributed the changes to the cumulative strain of prolonged surgery, fluid shifts, and extended anesthesia time. Procedures were paused as anesthesiology attempted to correct the abnormalities, increasing oxygen delivery and administering medications to support circulation. Despite these measures, Sophia's oxygen levels continued to decline, and signs of respiratory distress became more pronounced. As circulation worsened, Sophia experienced sudden cardiovascular collapse. Her heart rhythm destabilized, and she went into cardiac arrest on the operating table. Emergency protocols were immediately initiated, including chest compressions, advanced airway management, and pharmacological resuscitation efforts. The operating room was converted into a full resuscitation setting, as additional medical staff were called in to assist. Despite prolonged efforts, Sophia did not regain spontaneous circulation. The embolic complications had caused severe oxygen deprivation and widespread organ failure that could not be reversed. She was pronounced dead in the operating room after resuscitation attempts were exhausted. The medical examiner later ruled the death accidental, caused by fat embolism syndrome associated with the Brazilian butt lift procedure. The cosmetic surgery clinic faced investigations, civil lawsuits, and disciplinary review by medical authorities following her death. It was February 14, 2018, at Sonoma Raceway in California. A clear winter afternoon brought mild temperatures and dry track conditions, ideal for a private performance driving event hosted on the circuit's technical road course. Alexander Rothschild III was 29 years old and attending his first track day with a newly acquired McLaren P1. The hybrid hypercar, valued at roughly $2 million, had been delivered less than 3 weeks earlier. Rothschild had made his fortune in speculative finance and was known among peers for collecting rare performance cars, often purchasing vehicles far beyond his driving experience. Despite owning several exotic cars, Rothschild's track background was limited to introductory sessions in much slower vehicles. He had never driven a car with the P1's power output, braking capability, or active aerodynamic systems. Instructors assigned to the event had recommended multiple lead-follow sessions and a conservative pace while learning the circuit, particularly through Sonoma's elevation changes and off-camber turns. Rothschild declined extended instruction, choosing instead to run solo laps. The session began uneventfully. During his first lap, Rothschild maintained moderate speeds and completed the circuit without incident. The McLaren's stability systems compensated smoothly for minor inputs, reinforcing his confidence. By the start of the second lap, he increased pace, braking later and applying throttle more aggressively on corner exit. Approaching a fast downhill section leading into a sweeping right-hand turn, Rothschild entered slightly faster than recommended for novice drivers. As the car crested and began to unload weight, he applied throttle earlier than the corner allowed. The rear of the vehicle stepped outward as traction diminished, triggering stability control intervention. Instead of easing off, Rothschild attempted to correct with abrupt steering input. The correction unsettled the car further, The McLaren slid wide toward the edge of the track, transitioning from oversteer into uncontrolled lateral movement. Rothschild attempted to brake while turning, reducing available grip. The car left the paved surface and entered the runoff area at speed before striking a tire barrier at an oblique angle. The impact generated extreme deceleration forces. The vehicle did not roll, but structural intrusion and sudden force transfer caused catastrophic injuries to the driver. Track safety crews reached the crash site within seconds and began emergency response procedures. Fire suppression was deployed as a precaution, though no sustained fire occurred. Medical personnel extracted Rothschild from the vehicle and initiated advanced life support. He was pronounced dead at the scene due to severe blunt force trauma resulting from the crash. An investigation conducted by track officials and vehicle data analysis found no mechanical failure. Telemetry showed excessive throttle application during corner entry and abrupt corrective steering inconsistent with recommended driving technique for the vehicle and track conditions. Instructors confirmed that Rothschild had declined additional training earlier in the day. The incident led to renewed emphasis on mandatory instruction for first-time hypercar drivers at private track events. Rothschild's death underscored the limits of technology when paired with inexperience, and how access to extreme performance does not substitute for skill, restraint, or preparation. It was September 18, 2015, at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. Clear autumn weather and calm winds created favorable conditions for private aircraft departures that morning, with steady business traffic moving in and out of the small but heavily used executive airport. Richard Pemberton was 52 years old and traveling to Miami for meetings related to a large residential development. He had accumulated significant wealth through aggressive real estate expansion and relied heavily on private aviation to manage projects across several states. His large cabin business jet had been in regular use for years, operating on tight schedules that left little margin for delays. In the months leading up to the flight, Pemberton had become increasingly focused on reducing operating expenses. Cash flow from one of his projects had slowed, prompting him to move aircraft maintenance to a lower-cost provider, offering faster turnaround times. The decision reduced annual expenses but also introduced unfamiliar technicians and abbreviated inspection timelines. The aircraft's pilot had flagged concerns following recent hydraulic work, noting inconsistent pressure readings that had appeared intermittently after servicing. Maintenance records later showed that several components in the flight control hydraulic system had been removed and reinstalled during routine repairs. While the work met minimum documentation requirements, investigators would later note that critical post-maintenance checks had been shortened to meet departure pressure. The aircraft was cleared for flight, despite unresolved discrepancies that had not been fully traced. The jet taxied for departure shortly after mid-morning. Pre-flight checks showed no active warnings, and the aircraft began its takeoff roll normally. Acceleration was smooth, and the pilot committed to takeoff as the aircraft passed decision speed. Just after passing decision speed, directional control began to degrade. The aircraft started drifting left despite corrective input, a sign later linked to uneven hydraulic pressure affecting nose wheel steering and brake modulation. The pilot initiated a high-speed rejected takeoff, deploying braking systems and aerodynamic spoilers. But deceleration was uneven. With limited remaining runway, the aircraft continued forward at high speed. The jet overran the runway boundary after veering off the side at high speed and struck airport infrastructure beyond the paved surface. The impact ruptured fuel lines beneath the fuselage, igniting a fire that spread rapidly through the cabin and cockpit. Emergency crews responded immediately, but the intensity of the fire prevented access until suppression was complete. Both occupants were pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation that followed focused on maintenance practices rather than pilot action. Data recovered from onboard systems showed no sudden catastrophic failure, but instead, a progressive loss of hydraulic effectiveness under takeoff loads. Inspectors found improperly secured fittings and evidence of uneven torque application on recently serviced components. While no single error was deemed sufficient to cause the crash alone, investigators concluded that rushed maintenance and incomplete verification procedures had significantly increased the risk of control loss during a critical phase of flight. Regulatory authorities revoked the maintenance provider's certification following the investigation and issued civil penalties for procedural violations. The accident was ruled preventable, attributed to cost-driven maintenance decisions that reduced safety margins below acceptable standards. It was December 31, 2013, in Las Vegas, Nevada. The final night of the year brought packed hotel floors, private suites booked months in advance, and discreet high-stakes gatherings held away from public casino rooms. Vincent Torino was 44 years old and hosting a private cash poker game inside a secured penthouse suite attached to one of his smaller casino properties. He had built a fortune estimated at tens of millions through aggressive expansion and partnerships, and he was known for playing alongside his wealthiest clients rather than observing from the sidelines. The game was invitation only, limited to 6 players with deep reserves, and structured to run continuously through the night. In the weeks leading up to New Year's Eve, Torino had been under mounting pressure. Several developments were over-leveraged and cash flow was tight. He saw the private game as both a social obligation and a way to keep influential gamblers close. Staff were instructed to keep the rooms stocked with alcohol, food, and anything the players requested so the game would not be interrupted. The session began in the early evening and quickly escalated. By midnight, the table was deep into 7-figure swings typical of private cash games among wealthy players. Torino had been awake since early morning and was visibly fatigued, but he refused to step away. To manage anxiety and maintain focus, he took prescription sedatives he regularly used for sleep, spacing doses between hands while continuing to drink throughout the night. As the hours passed, Torino's coordination worsened. He slurred slightly, missed routine actions, and leaned heavily into his chair between hands. Other players attributed the behavior to exhaustion and alcohol, common during long sessions. No one intervened. The game continued into the early morning, with Torino remaining seated as attendants quietly removed empty glasses and replaced them. Shortly after 4 a.m., Torino stopped responding during a pause in play. His breathing became shallow and irregular, and he slumped forward at the table. Initially, those nearby assumed he had fallen asleep. When attempts to wake him failed, staff were alerted, and emergency services were called. Medical responders arrived within minutes and found Torino unresponsive with severely depressed respiration. He was provided oxygen and emergency support while being transferred from the suite, but his condition deteriorated rapidly. Despite continued intervention, he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at a nearby hospital. The medical examiner later ruled the death accidental. The cause was respiratory depression resulting from the combined effects of alcohol and prescription sedatives, compounded by extreme fatigue. Toxicology confirmed levels consistent with overlapping central nervous system suppression rather than intentional overdose. Following Torino's death, the private game was permanently discontinued. His estate entered probate, and control of his casino holdings shifted to trustees, while creditors assessed outstanding obligations. The incident drew little public attention beyond regulatory filings, but among Las Vegas high-stakes circles, it became a quiet reminder of how unchecked excess and insulation from consequences could turn a private indulgence into a fatal mistake. Thanks for watching. Click the next video to see more shocking stories.